Presenting Farah Al Qasimi's first solo show at Barakat Contemporary, we are here to have in-depth conversation with Farah about her solo show and other interesting projects and work. To begin with, those who are not familiar with the artist, I would like to provide a brief introduction about Farah Al Qasimi. Farah is an artist working primarily with photography, video, and performance. She is based in UAE and New York and actively participates in many exhibitions, international art events. To mention a few, she had a solo show at the Delphina Foundation last year, the Contemporary Art Museum St. Louis, and MIT Wrist Visual Art Center. Prominent international exhibitions such as Gwangju and Sharjah Biennial, the Yokohama Triennale, and the Lahore Biennial have introduced her work to the international public. Major art institutions including Guggenheim, New York, Tate Modern, London, Bard College Hassel Museum, and the Museum of Contemporary Art, Toronto, feature her works in their project and group exhibitions. Farah's works has been collected by many major art museums, including Guggenheim, New York, Guggenheim, Abu Dhabi, the Museum of Modern Art, New York, and Central Pompidou, Tate Modern, London, and Art Jongno-gu. First of all, I'm very delighted to host your first solo show in Korea at Barakat Contemporary. It's a great opportunity to share your world of art to the Korean audience. Although we are hosting your first solo show, this is not first time. Your work already has been introduced to many Korean people through last year Gwangju Biennial. Last year in Gwangju, you presented installation with collage photographs and videos on the wall. The work seems to focus on recreating a private archive, documenting your family life based on the family album. As I know, it was not your first display that features private family images. Will you explain the meaning of the type of archival work for you?
Yeah, so for the work that I showed at Gwangju, I was looking at these old photography albums that my grandmother had kept over the years. And she had immigrated from Lebanon to the United States in the 1950s. And these photo albums were basically her way of tracing where different parts of our family ended up when they emigrated from Lebanon. So some people ended up in Central and South America, some people ended up in Canada, some people ended up in the Eastern United States, which is where my mother ended up growing up. And these albums are so beautiful because they're records, you know, they're kind of ways of saying, this is who this person is and this is where they are now, and you know, there's newspaper clippings and there's formal studio portraits, and then there's kind of more informal family photos or vacation photographs. It was a really beautiful way to kind of see a part of my family history that I didn't experience because I wasn't around. And since my grandmother passed away when I was very young, there were a lot of questions that I didn't get to ask her. And that kind of constant revisiting of this archive that she so carefully kept was a way to try and piece together some of the parts of the story that I didn't know. So with that particular show, the photographs are reworked in my studio, and they're also kind of blown up, they're placed within different dimensions, there are other objects in front of them, and they're kind of taking these different parts of family mythology and oral history and contemporary photographs that I've taken and looking at these through lines over the decades as that part of my family became a little bit more assimilated to American life, you know, and kind of really thinking about the document or the archive as something that could exist beyond just a record.
Mm-hmm. So last year when I visited in UAE, actually I was very impressed by people who love Korean culture. But for many Korean people, many aspects of Arabic culture still stay in unknown area. You were born and raised in UAE and went to the United States of America at 17, and you studied photography and music at Yale. Many of your works contain cultural elements of your native country, and presumably the experience of living in two different cultures must have impact on your life and your work to a great extent. So I'm interested in how you experienced American culture, the first time you went to the States, and how the cross-cultural experience shaped, influenced your art.
So in terms of my relationship to culture, I think that we're really seeing a lot of obsession with K-pop and K-drama right now. And it's because the way that people interact with other cultures or learn about other cultures is through media and things that are able to kind of be widely shared and downloaded and viewed or listened to. So there's not really an inverse of that right now for the Arab world, but it's happening. I think it is really starting to happen slowly, where there are now film production studios and art programs and musicians. So I think that there will be a kind of interesting reach that starts to happen in the next few years or decades or beyond that. I grew up at a time when the local broadcasting was not so centered on local programming, which is to say that we had a lot of translations of other children's TV shows. So it was a lot of animes, and one of them is called Lady Lady or Candy Candy, and it's originally Japanese, but people all over the world watched it. It was very widely translated into a multiplicity of languages. We also had Sesame Street, the American puppet show. And so when I moved to the US at 17, I had a little bit of familiarity with it because my mother's family is from there, and I had been going and watching and rewatching American cartoons for most of my life. But I think what really hit me when I got there was the kind of everythingness of it. I was in, not a major city, I was in a small city, but I've always been amazed by the fact that you go into a pharmacy, right, which should be where you buy medicine, but you can buy bubble gum, candy, hair ties, electrical products. You can buy magazines, you can buy Christmas trees, everything. So this idea of choice and just a total embarrassment of opportunity in the sense of how consumers are appealed to, I think that was really one of the biggest culture shocks for me. I think also age too, because I was experiencing a lot of places where there was some sense of history, and I think growing up in a country that's only 50-something years old, and at the time was much younger, you just experience time in a different way, because all the in the UAE all the building materials are new-ish, and so there's a look to the architecture that really places you within a certain time period, and I think that all over the world, and certainly being here in Seoul over the last few days, you can kind of feel time, you feel the way that a place changes throughout time, kind of much more heavily or across a much wider spectrum. So I think that my experience of time was really informed by where I grew up.
Yeah. You participate in a very interesting project in New York, public art projects in New York, the city where you settled down after UAE. Begin First Disco, which is the title of the project, was organized in 2020 in collaboration with Public Art Fund, New York. Your work were displayed in 100 bus stops across the city. Presenting your work outside of the typical setting of an art institution, how did you feel, and what did you intend to talk about through the project?
That project was so interestingly timed because most of the shooting for it happened in 2019, and then 2020 hit, and suddenly it was one of 4 things that you could see, 4 exhibitions that you could see safely because it was out in public. So when I made that work, I was thinking very specifically about these advertising spaces on the bus terminals that usually are pretty expensive to rent out. So the people who are using them, you know, it's usually corporations who have a lot of advertising revenue, or the city of New York putting out like PSAs and advertisements about how to get rid of your trash. You know, there's no middle ground of regular business owners in New York being able to afford ad space. At the same time, the people who keep New York City running are small businesses who are usually run and owned by immigrants. So my uncle is one of them. He's Lebanese, and he owns a convenience store, one of the stores where you can buy everything, not the big brand ones, but like a corner store. And those are the places that really become people's touchstones when they live in a big city. Your corner store is like your home, you know. So I wanted to highlight those places and really think about kind of giving them these totems or these like spaces of honor throughout the city where they're celebrated and they're shown in a space that they don't usually get shown. So I went to maybe 11 or 12 different places all around New York City in all the boroughs. There's a barbershop owned by a Palestinian man. There's a beauty salon owned by a Pakistani woman. There was a curtain shop owned by a Dominican woman that was in my neighborhood. And, you know, just kind of like going inside these places and talking to people and photographing what it felt like to be in there for a moment. So I think a lot of people were confused by it because they thought that they were advertisements because they were in these places where advertisements normally are. And so it was nice to kind of realize over time, based on how people were responding, kind of watching them respond to them, that they realized that the photographs didn't want anything from them. You know, they weren't saying, buy this or do this or come here. They were just kind of existing as this collage of place and time across the city.
Let's go back to the UAE story a bit. Among the works showcased in Barakat Contemporary, the Dragon Mart light display, which is this work, seems to be a portrait of our overly materialistic society. And it is an image that brings to mind a futuristic or kitsch mixture of its changing economic culture, technology, and consumerism. The title and the venue of the work, Dragon Mart. I know that this is a special place for you. Why and how is it special for you?
I think that Dragon Mart is an amazing place because, you know, the souk has historically been such an important place in the Arab world. And this is kind of a new version of it that is accounting for people's lessening ability to deal with the heat. So it's indoors, it's absolutely massive, and the kind of interior architecture really manages to replicate the feeling of being in a bazaar where you have alleyways, you have back alleyways. Usually that's where the better deals are because people are more willing to kind of, you know, give you a discount. So I think it's a place to spend time, it's a place to walk in the summer, and it's a place to feel connected to the rest of the world because when you're there, you're buying things that everyone in the rest of the world is buying. You know, and so there is a universality to a certain kind of product, like, you know, the plastic keychains that have like the little bubble teas and the glitter that you can shake, or, you know, the plastic stools that people sit on at their stalls everywhere in the world pretty much, but especially in Asia. There's a way that you feel like you're getting an immediate visualization of global trends, and it makes me feel more connected. I think too, it's like, you know, people have always they've always placed a lot of value in objects. I think that now we're just much more wasteful about it, and a lot of these objects are using, you know, plastic and petroleum byproducts, and in a way their place in our lives is shorter lasting, but the objects themselves are longer lasting, and that's why we have such a proliferation landfills that aren't going anywhere, that are just getting filled up with trash. So I don't know, it's a place where I think about the longevity of objects, the materiality of objects, and how kind of the trend cycle, the global trend cycle plays a part in all of that.
I'd like to talk about a video that is now part of our show. Your work, 𝘬𝗪𝗪, Mother of Fire, was recently shown at Tate. The UAE regions experienced the Portuguese invasion in the 1500s and then colonial period until 1970s when the British government decided to withdraw. Watching Mother of Fire, it becomes difficult to tell the facts from the fiction. Although it takes the form of a reality TV show, the work lies between documentary and fiction. Can you tell me more about your approach to history in the film?
I think that film and the way it's made really acknowledged the complete subjectivity of history and it being totally dependent on who is telling the story. So if you take, for example, there's a sequel to that movie that looks at the accounts written by the British East India Company accusing the tribe that I come from of being pirates. But if you listen to their account, they say, well, we were the resistance fighters defending our coastline from British invasion. So there's really no way to kind of approach historical events saying, this happened, this happened, this happened. There's always kind of way that it's colored with whoever is telling it. So for that film, I wanted to make a story about the history of exorcisms and spirituality and possession in the region, but exorcism had recently been outlawed, so it became impossible to find an exorcist who would actually talk to me. So instead of making a documentary, I thought, okay, let me take this information, let me look at this history, and turn it into a kind of storytelling project by this character that I play. So instead of me as a director showing you this happens and this happens and this happens, you're kind of taking it from the narrator. And it allowed a lot more room for playfulness, and there are parts of it that are completely documentary style, especially when you hear from people who are saying that they've had experiences with spiritual possession, or they've been exorcised, or they've had a moment where they really felt like they weren't in control of their body. So I think it does touch on these very human stories, but whether it's true in the sense that people understand scientific truth or empirical truth, I think doesn't matter so much. I think it's really about people's beliefs and how they are kind of navigating a changing world.
There appears a ghost character named Jean.
Yeah.
You created and played the character in the film. We also can hear your voice through the character talking about the history of the UAE and practice of exorcism, like you said. It seems that you're interested in communicating something very significant through Jean.
I think almost every culture has their own version of a spiritual entity that has the power to control or occupy a human body. I think the jinn is just the Muslim version, but I think ultimately it was about how a community gathers around their spiritual beliefs, how people continue to practice those beliefs when the world makes it so much more difficult to believe in things that are unseen. So I think also the collective aspect of the exorcisms was really important, because when somebody was possessed, a lot of their community comes together during the exorcism to witness them physically move and dance and cast the ghost out. And now that it's outlawed, it's harder and harder to find people who are willing to do that. And it's not, it's much more hidden. It's not like a big kind of celebration where everybody comes and experiences this kind of release. So I think there's also, for me, an argument for having these spaces where something, you know, indescribable or unimaginable is happening, but everybody is experiencing it. And it happens, you know, a lot of people in the US, for example, who go to very powerful church sermons on Sunday, a lot of them faint because they say they feel the power of the Lord, you know. There is this kind of collective energy that people are plugging into, and they're feeding off of each other. And there has to be, I think, some space for that in society to an extent where I don't practice it myself. And I think that there are different societal reasons to that. But it does seem as though there is a kind of group hysteric that gets reached in that moment that does something for the collective and for people's well-being.
The people in your photographs, as shown in the work titled Wrestling with the Spectres and Selfie with the Toy Gun, the people's faces are often covered. Also, the traditional clothing, like a hijab, it covers part of our bodies. So naturally, it makes us think of Arabic women's role and status. And in the work, nose greeting, which is not part of this show, but you shot two Arabic men huddled closely together and their nose almost touching in a traditional greeting manner. According to the cultural background of the audience, this work could be read differently. So in my view, you are trying to touch on some social aspect and consciousness that exist but have largely been untold in the UAE culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at one point that was true of my work. I think naturally a lot of the people in the photographs are, you know, they're mutajaba, they wear the hijab, or they prefer to be anonymous in photographs. So I think that in a way, some of that is just a natural byproduct of where I was and who my people are, and wanting to kind of honor their requirements for being photographed. So I think more and more I'm interested in really jumping across this regional specificity. Even though it is important where I'm from, I understand it very well, but I think that there are things to touch upon that the UAE just seems to be a really good model for, and one that I have access to. So I think, for example, in this show, you see photographs from New York City, you see a video that was filmed in Italy, and you see work from the UAE. So it's really a mix of places, and also a mix of kind of demographics of people photographed. But I think generally I am, when I'm photographing somebody, I am aware of this history of, you know, a portrait needing to be somehow intimate or revealing or inviting you in to be a good portrait. And I don't really believe that personally. I think also we can find emotional resonance in places that are not the expression on a person's face. And I think I want to push for that in my work, to really think about inviting you into a moment rather than into a person's, inner life. And I think that there are ways that we can relate to these worlds or, these tableaus, these universes. And we don't have to be stand-ins for the people in the image. We can kind of appreciate them at a certain amount of distance. So I think I'm always thinking about that critical distance between the photographer and the subject, the looker and the photograph, and how there could be this interesting triangulation happening, but that I don't have to be encroaching on anybody's personal sense of privacy and space in order to do that.
So not only the content of the show, but the installation method is very interesting. On the background of a large photograph and picture in an aluminum frame, sometimes a flat screen monitor and smartphone. The installation creates kind of camouflage effects So for each exhibitions, you made this type of site-specific installation. It reminds me of an image board or advertisement algorithm. Could you tell me more about how you start this type of installation?
I think this kind of installation is really just a natural development for me in looking at how the world uses screens. For example, a few years ago, with the iPhone, it started to become possible when you're watching a video on YouTube or something, you can minimize the video in the corner of your screen, and you can continue scrolling your email. So while you're looking at an important email, you have a tiny screen in the corner of a music video or somebody talking about something or like doing a fried chicken tasting, whatever. So this kind of split attention requirement that our devices are continually creating and then satisfying, I think it has to be in my work because I'm a person who makes images and uses screens. I think also, in my hotel, I look out the window and I see I see the buildings of Seoul, but then I also see a giant LED screen that is showing me an advertisement for a product or a member of a K-pop band. It's constantly, it's forever embedded in our kind of public architecture now that you are not just looking at an image of something, you're looking at an image within an image. And so this is totally transforming our, not only our attention spans, but our relationships to, how we see ourselves within the world, how we are constantly looking at things as photographs, and we are thinking of ourselves as subjects, and we need it. We need the sort of photograph as the record of the moment more and more. I mean, I've been amazed here at how, in all of these kind of tourist spots, people will dress up, right? And it's not about the experience of dressing up, it's about the experience of taking the photograph. So in every single one of my photographs that I've taken here, there's like 20 people going like this, or going like this, or going like this, and that is what, you wouldn't see that in a photograph 50 years ago. Maybe you would see this, it was like what, the 70s, 50 years ago, you might see this, but you wouldn't see an entire group of people posing. It wasn't, that kind of choreography wasn't like fully embedded in the way that we experienced ourselves in space. So yeah, I think that my work is just a response to that. And I'm somebody who's constantly juggling all of these different screens for my work. It has to be part of my editing process. It has to be part of my installation process, because there are usually screens in the work where there are people who are engaged in screens. So yeah, I think that's how I show the kind of, again, the everythingness of it.
Let's talk about space. Our exhibition title is Blue Desert Online, which is coming from Korean online game, Black Desert Online. What do you focus on delivering through your solo show in Korea?
I think a lot of the work in this show is about gaming and the work that we are constantly doing to create a version of utopia, and how more and more it seems like that utopia can only exist virtually. So when I was growing up, the video game technology was not that great in the sense that it wasn't that realistic. The games were amazing and imaginative, but ultimately you're looking at like 8 pixel, it's like a man is like 3 dots or something. Where now you have these really expertly rendered, super realistic universes, and you can meet people, and you can, you sit there with your headset, or you go to a gaming cafe and you can make friends, and it just has totally opened up this idea of what the world is, or how small or big it could be. So I think that there's a lot of hope in that, even though people see gamers and they think, oh, they're stuck in their phones, or they're stuck in these fake worlds, and there's no kind of optimism in it. But I actually think a lot of the gamers that I know are really optimistic. And even if you think about how powerful Animal Crossing was during the pandemic, how people they were stuck in their living rooms, but they could I never played Animal Crossing, so I'm not going to say it right, but they could like build out their hangout spaces and invite people over. So, you know, I think that there's always a resistance to new technology, or there's always a resistance to when something new or modern or that, you know, that represents the future to replace what we already know. But that's just the natural order of things. You know, things are not going to stay the same forever. So instead of viewing the proliferation of these kind of virtual paradises in the worlds of young people as bad or negative, or, you know, they should be experiencing the moment, can we possibly think about how it might create greater connectivity, you know, greater empathy? And I know a lot of the time it doesn't, but I will tell you, I spend a lot of time on TikTok. Most of the time, the comment sections are really positive. So I think there's something in that. That, I don't know, hopefully this show hints at. There's also like a deep sadness too. I think that there's, the sun reappears a lot in this show as a symbol of global warming and rising temperatures, which is no longer a concept. It is fully a reality. It's been a reality. It's felt, it's proven, and it's extremely terrifying. And I think that the people who are, you know, in their teens right now, who are gaming and having fun, they're inheriting a world that is deeply broken. So, you know, even though the sun in the horizon feels like it's this kind of hopeful image a lot of the time, I think I want to present it as a real symbol of danger.
So in this show, we are showing 2 films in the screen room. I was thinking of the pandemic when I was watching the video. The pandemic has changed our view of life. On a positive note, I think the experience of living in an enclosed and isolated place, the sense of insecurity can lead our attention to the more realistic problems to do with the environment surrounding our lives. Your video, Signs of Life, offers words of comfort with its image of nature and message delivered through the narrator saying we need to find the river. Ironically, we seek consolation through the screen displaying nature, but it feels strangely peaceful. I'd like to hear more about this work.
This is a video that I filmed just with my iPhone on a residency in Italy last year, in a very, 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 very hot part of the year where it was constantly just sweltering heat and strong sun. And I would go on these walks all the time. And one day I heard about this waterfall that existed, but I couldn't find it. And then one day I found it just by mistake. I heard it. And I found it, and it felt like such a miracle to see a moving body of water in a place that was so parched and so dry. So a lot of the video games that I grew up with begin with this objective that you have. You've usually waken up from a dream, or you've been, you know, you've been somehow in a trance for 100 years, and you wake up and this, you know, disembodied voice says to you, you're awake, this is what you have to do, and that's the objective of the game. So it kind of felt like, for me, the objective that whole time was to find water, because it symbolized possibility, it symbolized hope, it symbolized life in a lot of ways too. And you know, I wanted it to exist within this sad post-apocalyptic world where, you know, the sun has kind of taken everything over and not everything has survived. But you have to make these choices, you know, to kind of locate hope within all of that. So yeah, I do think it's like, it's not really about what happens in the video, but it's about the kind of narrative journey that you get taken on and the way that you answer some of the questions internally that are being presented on the screen.
The last, I would like to talk about the medium, photography. When it comes to photographic imagery, there follows the expectation that photography is a medium that reflects a reality. In the history of the medium, there also exist other views and ideas that try to twist or question the expectation. For example, the photographer Diane Arbus said, the more picture tells, the less you know. In my view, your pictures are not only transferring part of the reality, but interested in the complex views of the world. The viewer tries to forge it through the medium and also in the viewers as the agent.
I think that photography has the power to show so many different realities, and that's what I love about it as a medium. I think you can invite 20 people to take a photograph from the exact same vantage point, and they're going to be different photographs. Somebody is going to choose a different thing to look at than the next person. And that's fascinating to me because everybody's making that decision based on their lived reality and their kind of complex hierarchy of what is important to leave out in an image. I think that because photography is used so much more now than it was in Diane Arbus's time, our expectation of what kind of reality it can give us has to also shift. And you know, I was educated on the photographers of the 20th century who were going out into the world and just looking at things and bringing them back. You know, the kind of street photographers who are claiming to show some slice of reality. And in a way it is, you know, when we look back on Joel Meyerowitz's photographs of New York in the 1960s, that is a reality that existed. It's a particular reality that one person saw. And it was not everybody's reality of New York in the 1960s. So I think that our kind of shifting understanding of the relationship between a photographer and the kind of the political nature of, you know, how they relate to their own surroundings, I think that necessary kind of widening of what photography is really changing the way that we demand information from the medium. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about experiencing reality, I spend a lot of time looking at what photographs other people make in their everyday lives. I look at geotags on Instagram all the time. I look at photo books, and I think that there's, you know, for me, I imagine my work existing somewhere in between those two, extremes of formality. But hopefully it should speak to somebody's reality, because it certainly speaks to mine, but I don't know if it's the governing reality in the world.
Mm-hmm. I think that we had a really interesting and deeper conversation about your work and the show. It's a really great pleasure to have a deep conversation with you, Father, and I hope all the audience who see this conversation understands better about your work. And thank you so much.